Dragon Ball has had a history of swordsmen and sword-like weapons, and with the finale to the Future Trunks arc of Dragon Ball Super, I want to bring you a historical breakdown of all of the prominent swordsmen that we have seen thus far in Dragon Ball, which includes canon, video games, and all media forms of Dragon Ball. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. One of the earliest swordsmen that we see in the Dragon Ball series is Yamcha, who bears a blade known as the Azure Dragon Sword, but he is not the only one. The Bear Thief in the beginning of Dragon Ball was also shown to hold a similar weapon to Yamcha, but was obviously much larger proportionately to Yamcha's size. And the Bear Thief was shown using the sword against Goku when he wanted to eat Turtle, originally known as Umigami. In Yamcha's case, his sword was first shown being used against Goku when they fought in the desert as he clashed against Goku's power pole. However, as you would have expected, Yamcha's blade really doesn't have any notable feats to it or kills. He abandons the usage of this Azure Dragon Sword later on in the series as he fights later on using hand-to-hand combat along with the usage of Ki. In terms of the historical usage of the Azure Dragon Sword, the design is likely based on the Chinese swords the Niu Wei Dao and the Liu Ye Dao, which translates as the Oxtail Saber and the Willow Leaf Saber, which are both classified as scimitars. These blades lost a lot of value when China faced enemies with armor later on throughout history. Moving on to the next type of sword, we have katanas, and the next swordsman that we see in the series is none other than Ninja Murasaki and his brothers, who all wield a katana known as the Sasani Shiki. The Sasani Shiki is a katana that is named after a specific type of Japanese rice from a place called Sendai that holds the same taste when it cools down, which makes it great to eat with sushi. Like Yamcha, his katana doesn't have any real feats to it, as Goku easily destroyed it with his power pole. As a continuity error, Murasaki was shown later on with the sword while the others were visiting Dr. Flap, and this could be a continuity error, or it could be the fact that he simply got another sword from one of his brothers. The other katana wielder would be Yajirobe, who has several feats with his. Funny enough, in Yajirobe's fight against Symbol, he managed to not only slice him in half, but he proceeded to eat him afterwards. He also easily sliced through an ice monster while he and Goku were looking for the divine water during the King Piccolo arc. And his biggest feat as a swordsman would easily be during his fight against Vegeta, as he managed to cut off Vegeta's tail. He sliced Vegeta's battle armor right through it, and if it wasn't for Goku's influence, Krillin would have killed Vegeta with Yajirobe's katana, killing a major villain at least that point of the series, which would have been a serious major feat. Now, in terms of historical usage, this obviously wouldn't surprise anyone, but katanas were used in feudal Japan. Specifically, the katana was used after the longsword called the tachi. Being developed during the Muromachi period of Japan, the samurais popularized the usage of this blade. Later on in World War II, all Japanese officers were required to use katanas, and many of them led bonsai charges with katanas along with lower-ranking soldiers. However, after World War II, samurai swords were banned from mass production. A swordsmith required a license just to produce them, and Japan requires each sword to be registered by the government. Today, katanas are only used by martial artists to practice with. The next sword that we have is the Guando used by Mercenary Tao. Some sources have named this type of sword a Niu Wei Dao, similar to Yamcha's Azure Dragon Sword, but if you really analyze the appearance, this sword is very similar to the Chinese Guando with a handle instead of a pole. Mercenary Tao uses this in his fight against Goku, but just like Murasaki, his sword was easily broken by Goku's power pole, giving him no real feats as well. And in terms of historical usage, this sword is also referred to in China as the Yanye Dao, which translates to the Moon Reclining Blade. The contemporary Wushu derived this weapon from both the Shaolin and the Wudan Quan. Also, the Guandao was often used by royal members who rode elephants for combat. This is similar to Western cultures, as we're used to using horses. Moving on, next we have Shoeless Lord, who has a very interesting story behind it. When Goku went to Demon World, this blade was used to hold the door open between Demon World and the Earth by being wedged into the ground. In order to remove the sword, Goku had to defeat Shula, which allowed him to pull the sword out and close the demon world. And in terms of historical usage, this sword is based on the Nanatsu Saya sword, which translates to the 7-branch sword in Japan. This sword is believed to have originated from the Jin dynasty in China. I should also point out that the design of Shula's sword is very similar to Meta Knight's Galaxia sword from the Kirby video game series, in addition to the Sword Art Online series where Grimlock forged the Guilty Thorn, which also looks very similar to the 7-branch sword as well. Now we move on to the most popular sword in the Dragon Ball series, which is the Gladius. And the next swordsman we have is Gohan. Similar to Goku, Gohan had a sword growing up just as how Goku had a power pole while they were living in the wilderness. Based on appearance, it greatly resembles the Roman Gladius. Gohan only really used this sword as a kid, as it was most notable for cutting off the tail of a T-Rex day by day for Gohan's food. Later on, near the end of the Frieza saga, we also see Chi-Chi taunting Roshi with a sword that looks similar to Gohan's based on presumption. The next Gladius we have is Future Trunks' sword, which is very similar to Gohan's in terms of design, with the exception of the handle where Gohan's was round and Trunks had handle slits near the grip of his sword. Trunks' sword by far has the most feats in Dragon Ball, as it sliced through Frieza, it was used against him from King Cole, and it managed to cut Zamasu in half in Dragon Ball Super, although the sword that Trunks used in Dragon Ball Super was not the original sword that he used in Dragon Ball Z. And in terms of movies, he managed to take out Android 14 with it as well. Despite its major successes, however, this sword has often been broken or lost numerous times throughout the series. Moving on to the next Gladius, we have Present Trunks and Tapion's Brave Sword. Just like his future counterpart, Present Trunks received the Brave Sword from Tapion in Wrath of the Dragon, and some media forms have had him use that sword in a lot of video games. Although it's virtually impossible for future Trunks to have received the sword from Tapion for a variety of reasons, most notably being the music box not being able to be opened without the Dragon Balls and there being no Z fighters, it actually makes a lot of sense for future Trunks to have received the sword from future Gohan, whereas the present Trunks could have received it from Tapion if you count the movies, or present Gohan himself as possibly giving it to him. And in terms of feats, this sword was responsible for cutting off Hirudegarn's tail and body. Moving on to the next Gladius, we have the Z Sword. Adult Gohan and future Trunks have both been shown using the Z Sword in the Dragon Ball series. Other than Kid Gohan's blade, future Trunks' blade, or present Trunks' blade, future Trunks and adult Gohan have wielded the Z Sword at some point, and if you do a side-by-side comparison, it strongly resembles a Gladius. Future Trunks used it in the manga to fight against Dabura, which ultimately got spit on and broken, and Gohan most notably used it to train with the Supreme Kai and Kibito against Super Buu, and afterwards this sword is also known for releasing the old Kai after it was broken by the metal known as the Kachin. And in terms of the historical usage for the Gladius, this sword was often used by Romans and Greeks as a default weapon for foot soldiers. Interestingly enough, these swords often had an owner's name on it, and because of its basic shape, it made it very easy for people to hold and wield a shield with it. Eventually, this sword was replaced by the Roman Spatha, which was very light and a lot less broad in size, which made it very easy to move. Also, in a historical context, the Z Sword specifically strongly resembles the Arthurian legend where King Arthur had to pull the sword out of a large stone. The next sword we have in the series is the Rapier, which is used by Kogu or Gokua. We never really see much of Kogu in Dragon Ball Z, but the sword he uses strongly resembles a rapier due to its very long and sleek design. Funny enough, Trunks killed him and broke his sword very similar to how 18 broke his sword during the android battle in the present. And in terms of the historical usage of the rapier, this sword was often used by Spanish inquisitors in the early 1500s for civilian combat and self-defense. Over time, the art of the rapier became a major part of fencing with one another. The next sword we have is the Dadao. Dabura's magical sword he created bears a very strong resemblance to the Chinese Dadao. Although he briefly used it against Gohan, it was easily broken once Gohan caught it and split it in half. Although it has no real feats, it seems as if Dabura can make the sword appear whenever he wants. In terms of the historical usage for the Dao, this sword was popularized in China during the Yuan dynasty as an effort to fight against the Mongols. This blade was pretty much the founding father of many scimitar-like weapons that came afterwards, like the Liu Ye Dao and the Neo Wei Dao, and the Pian Dao and the Yan Mao Dao. Yes guys, it's a lot of Daos, but those are all of the types of swords that this pretty much led to creating later on. The next sword we have is the Jian. Janemba's dimensional sword bears a very strong resemblance to the Chinese Jian. The dimensional sword is by far one of the more interesting swords in terms of its ability. Janemba created it by manipulating a club with his sword, and he's able to shoot great beams that go very far distances that can cut like Krillin's Destructo Disc. In Dragon Ball Xenoverse, he has a move called Rakshasas Claw, which is named after a being in Hindu mythology describing a man-eating monster. And in terms of historical usage, this sword was developed during the spring and autumn period of China. Users would practice on saplings, bamboo, and rice to hone their skills. In terms of technical usage, this sword specialized in stabbing and thrusting while also being good for slashing as well. Now moving on to energy swords, Saul was an early character in Dragon Ball Z to show the concept of an energy blade or an energy sword in the Dragon Ball series. However, in his case it was just simply ineffective. In terms of Vegito, his spirit sword technique used against Buu managed to go right through him, and he also used it against Zamasu in Dragon Ball Super. In terms of Goku Black has some very interesting feats with his energy blade. He managed to stab several characters such as Gowasu, Goku, Chi-Chi, Goten, and Vegeta for starters. He also did a Mortal Kombat fatality on a raging barbarian as well, and in addition to the blade, Black also manages to create a scythe-like weapon with it as well. Moving on, similar to Kuwabara, Trunks managed to regrow his broken sword using his own energy, which he used to create his own energy blade. And with the power of all the living organisms left on Earth, Trunks used borrowed energy to slice Zamasu. The way Trunks grew his sword strongly resembles the way Kuwabara's spirit sword in several ways. And in terms of historical usage, obviously energy blades don't exist in real life, but we've seen energy swords in fiction. Although lightsabers are built with kyber crystals, we have seen users utilize the force in conjunction with lightsabers, and in the video games such as StarCraft or Halo, we've seen beam swords and psionic blades. So whether it's through energy or another source, Dragon Ball definitely did not invent the concept of an energy sword. So guys, that has been my video for today. Overall, I had a lot of fun doing all this research on these swords and swordsmen. Personally, my favorite sword and swordsman would have to be Janemba with his dimensional sword, as I just think it's so cool how Janemba could pretty much manipulate that sword to shoot those energy beams, in addition to his own powers and pretty much manipulating dimensions itself. I'd really like to hear who your favorite swordsman and sword is in the series as well. So with everything else said, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.